By the way, I usually, I'm better prepared, but it's a Sunday, so I have a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow. So apologies.
I'm guilty as charged as well, so not a big deal. Not a big deal. So I'm going to
Um,
have to look more to the camera than you, but yeah. So what are we going to talk about, Payman?
I kind of liked your suggestion where you said you want to. I think the word you used was educate Canadians.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
So I was curious to know like what level of granularity you wanted to get into. You were talking about educating them on the Parliament, so
Okay. Um, I find most Canadians equate our democracy with the American democracy, in the sense that most people believe that when they vote for, say, a Liberal candidate, their vote is being cast in favor of Justin Trudeau, when in reality that's not the case. They're casting a vote in favor of that candidate. Now, if our parliament were to operate properly, what our constituents should be voting for is the candidate that they feel will best represent them in Ottawa. And hopefully, from the party's perspective, the party will gain enough candidates that are willing to represent the constituents better than any other candidate, to the point where they form a majority in Parliament, at which point the leader of that party becomes Prime Minister. That's the ideal way for things to be. But unfortunately, we seem to think that if we cast a vote for a Liberal candidate, we're casting a vote for Justin Trudeau. If we cast a vote for a Conservative candidate, we're casting a vote for Pierre Poilievre in our the way our politics are today. And same thing for NDP. The problem with I had this summed up to me quite nicely after a bit of an issue I had earlier or back in February, and I'm in fairly close communication with a chap in the States, and he actually ran for lieutenant governor for Michigan. So I was telling him about the problems I had, and he says, "Well, join the club." He says, "What happens with both sides of the spectrum? We've got left and right side of the spectrum, and the left side of the spectrum tends to pick a bully, and then they lockstep in behind that bully. And we see that with the NDP, we see that with the Liberals especially, and we also see it with the Conservatives, is they've lockstepped in behind their leader and will not change or question or challenge their leader. Where on the right side of the spectrum, we have strengths and weaknesses on both sides of the spectrum. On the left, that's their strength, is that they're able to lockstep in behind their leader and will not change from that lockstep position. Whereas on the right side of the spectrum, we tend to think more innovatively, we tend to think more creatively, and we also think very independently. That's our strength. But our weakness is, especially in the system we're in right now, which tends to be the way democracies work, our weakness is the fact that we do function and operate very independently. So the right side of the spectrum, we tend to find leaders and follow the leaders, where the left side, they tend to find bullies and lockstep in behind them. So it's difficult for us. Now, what happens? We can beat that system through our constituents, as long as the constituents believe that they can elect a leader rather than a bully. And so that's the fight I feel we have as the PPC, is that we're looking for leaders. We're not looking for bullies. And we're looking to inspire our population rather than force acquiescence. So, so now I think I've went down into a rabbit hole. I'm not sure how far down I've gone, but moving forward, what people, because we have this equation between Canadian politics and American politics that's wrong. People believe that voting for the flavor rather than the individual is to their best interest. And we end up in this constant battle where liberals will tax and spend us into oblivion, and the conservatives will come in and try and clean up the mess. And when we get tired of trying to fix the mess, and we're just about to the point where we can actually make it, it's going to improve our lives, we get tired and we re-elect liberals that will come along and ruin things for us again. And we saw that Stephen Harper, when he left, he was in the process of paying off our debt at the rate of about $3 billion a year. And within a year, we went from $3 billion being paid off to $40 billion in debt, like for the $40 billion further behind. And Justin Trudeau hasn't had a budget less than $40 billion deficit, which over 4 years prior to COVID, we were $160 billion behind our tax revenue before COVID. And then if we add on what we could have been saving as a result of Stephen Harper, before we got into COVID, we were $172 billion worse off. And then COVID, we were spending money at the rate of spending money faster than we were bringing it in at the rate of about $1 billion a day. So we...
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
What do you think is, what's the underlying problem with society that tolerates a government that doesn't have a budget?
We seem to think that money grows on trees. We seem to think that it's okay to spend money without having to earn money. I think we've normalized deficit spending. We've normalized that it's okay to be in debt. And we've normalized that kind of, run into an interesting saying a while ago, and it goes to the effect that the biggest problem most people have is they're willing to sacrifice what they really want for what they want now. And I really think that that's, from a societal perspective, that's probably the biggest problem we have is that sense of instant gratification. And because we've normalized deficit spending, we seem to think that that's I know I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure we all are, is if we go to the bank and we can, negotiate, say, $5,000 or $10,000, or we get a fresh credit card, it's really easy to go on a spending spree and buy things that you think you want, and then at the end of the spending spree, you're left having to pay the piper. And if anyone's ever paid off a debt, it's a whole lot easier going in than it is coming back out. And I think that's what's what we've done is we've elected cowards as representatives. No one wants to stand up and say, "Hey, when are we going to pay the piper on this?" And we've determined that it's okay to pay outrageous salaries to bureaucrats that really don't earn their salaries. They don't. I mean, if there's a reason they're in a bureaucracy rather than in the real world, because it's a lot tougher to earn a salary in the real world at the rate that they earn them in the in government. So over the years, another issue is our Constitution. Our Constitution allows for collective bargaining. We've allowed, there's only one profession that has a union, All other professions don't have unions, but teachers have a union. And we've allowed the teachers to negotiate some pretty outrageous terms. And those terms are coming back to bite us. We've got bureaucrats that have encouraged legislation that protects their remuneration and their position. There are certain bureaucracies that are necessary. There are others that that really are not. And as long as we're willing to encourage parasitical behavior, which is a lot of the bureaucracies, especially the unnecessary bureaucracies, as long as we're willing to encourage that behavior, then we precipitate it. It grows. That behavior grows. I mean, if I'm working in the well, I've got a friend. He had his own business. He was doing very well. Worked long hours, hard hours, and he ended up. I think he ended up before the Human Rights Tribunal over some stupid thing, and he said, "That's it." Locked the shop doors, threw in the towel, kicked all his customers out. He went and got himself a job with the government. Now, he's become a much narrower and much, how can I say it? His world went from, let's see how I can figure out how to solve problems, and running into problems and dealing with problems all the time, and people happy to pay him for solving. And he was actually a brilliant troubleshooter, brilliant problem solver. Now he's just a politician. He just goes in and he does a BS type of work. He's either sucking up to his superiors or working with his superiors, and he's really not the interesting person he was when I first met him. But I don't blame him for doing what he did. I mean, it's tough to run your own business, and it's tough to deal with bureaucracies, and it's tough when they turn on you. So. And that kind of mentality is permeating throughout our country. So rather than being a wealth creator, he's become a wealth taker. And our governments are not geared like it's basically something that has nothing. The only way it generates its existence is through taxation, and taxation is a form of theft. And especially taxation without accountability.
I have a question on that same issue of bureaucracy. So you and I were both running for federal office, and we're both from the same party. One of my campaign philosophy principles is that a lot of our problems are as a result of government overregulation. In addition to this gentleman you mentioned, who basically had his whole business crushed by bureaucracy, is there anyone in your constituency that you've talked to that has a similar experience?
Well, this chap is in my constituency. Well, when I first moved to the area, there was this hole-in-the-wall restaurant out in the middle of nowhere that was absolutely, it was almost a destination point. It was, especially for breakfast. They had the most awesome breakfast. They had farmer sausage. It was, most sausage is really fatty. This was extremely lean and well seasoned. That's it. Okay. Well seasoned, and like it was, and they made their own homemade bread. So it was like this was a really good, high quality place to go to, but it was a hole in the wall. I imagine that they had to deal with health standards, and the health standards got to the point where they couldn't stay open. And it's unfortunate. We lost a beautiful little restaurant that was doing well. It had staff, it had a customer base that was extremely happy, and it was a highly functioning entity. It's gone. Doesn't exist. I'm now, this is something that I'm starting right now. I've started. It's a concept. You're part of. Are you a contracted PPC candidate, Payman?
What does that mean, contracted?
Have you signed a contract with the party to?
Yes.
Okay. One of the requirements in the contract is to build your membership. Correct. Um, I've come up with a solution to that helps me. It helps local businesses and it helps our members. And what I've done is I've gone to the mom and pop shops primarily, the ones that have been targeted, and the ones that were considered non-essential, and the ones that actually survived COVID. And I'm approaching them and saying, look, I want to do something to help build your business. I want you to do something to help build my campaign, and I want you to do something that's going to help you and my members. And so I asked them to give a break to PPC members. So like a 10% break on pricing or whatever they think they can afford. And then I promote their business to PPC members. And the PPC members go in and support their business. And then what's happening is once I've got the PPC members on board, then I start chasing after my adherents that I've met through door knocking or whatever, and convincing them that they need to become members. And so it's a win-win-win for everyone. It costs the business a little bit of money to bring the people in, but hopefully the higher volume will offset that cost. So that's, I mean, I'm going to encourage you to do something similar. It gives you an excuse to talk to the businesses, gives you an excuse to sell more memberships, and I think it's something that I'd like to see it go across the country. I'd like to see it so that we know every business across the country that supports the PPC, and as we travel across the country, we can go to the hotels or the restaurants or the services or whatever we require, and that will support us. That's supporting us, and we can support them in return. What drove that idea is my nephew lives in Eastern Ontario, and I traveled out to visit him last fall, and we would stop at the en routes. And they were driving me absolutely nuts because it's so crowded and so many people. Like it's like we're all a bunch of lemmings that are going to these stupid en routes. And I thought, this is wrong. I can't support this stuff. And so I started pulling off the when it was time we needed to do a pee break or a lunch break or something, I'd pull off on the next interchange, go a mile or a couple miles off the beaten track, and sure enough, I'd find a little restaurant that was just gasping for air, and I'd support them. And it works. In my opinion, it works a whole lot better. It's a whole lot more convenient, and I see a little bit more of Ontario than I would by going to these stupid en route things. So that's what motivated me to start thinking outside the box. And then I thought, well, I need to build my membership, and there's businesses around that need to build their business. So let's work together on this.
Smart strategy, and I have to admit, it never occurred to me.
Well, that is one thing I really want to push, and that our party is falling really short on, is that theoretically there's 330. Well, it's going to be 342. I think is the right number of ridings coming up. But there's a lot of really smart candidates out there, and a lot of candidates that are probably like me or you and think a little bit outside the box. And if we can share ideas. Now, maybe you won't have the infrastructure right now to set up what I'm doing. But if you've got that idea in the back of your mind, and then you start running into a couple of businesses, and you run into a couple of volunteers that have a good network with local businesses, I mean, you can start building a really good network that will work for your members and work for the businesses as well. So.
Wayne, I didn't think that we would be going off in these
Rabbit
just the
holes?
general. Yeah, but I want to continue this on. So I wanted to bring up the issue of corruption. Let's just call it that. So you're out east, so I don't know if are you aware of the former mayor of Chestermere, Jeff Colvin, who got sacked?
No, no. I take it he's in BC, is he?
He's actually in Alberta. So he
Alberta.
he
Okay.
he notices it's corruption, and he notices kickbacks and payouts. He puts together a report, escalates it to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, as he should,
Yeah.
and the Minister of Municipal Affairs immediately removes him because he's involved in this as well.
Okay.
So, what are your views on corruption in Canada? Do you think it's not really an issue, or is it rampant?
We are fast becoming a two-bit third world country. Every two-bit third world country on the planet is rife with corruption. That's one of the things that drives or keeps them in that two-bit third world status is the corruption, the exploitation of the uh, constituents, the taxpayers, the individual. And so, yes, we have serious corruption, and that is, our municipalities are have a lot, like, highly corrupt. Whether it's like, for example, my mayor, he has spent probably $3 million on a barn, and the neighborhood, the comments are, you can't put a $3 million barn up on the salary he's making. He's got to be pulling something from somewhere. Now, I know him personally, and I think he has a little more integrity than that, but you never really know. I've got a friend who used to work for CRA. We're all familiar with CRA. CRA has a really bad habit of approaching individuals and telling them they owe X dollars. 99% of the time, people will write a check rather than have CRA hassle them in any way. So we need to push back on that. Every time we say, this is wrong, but it's easier, cheaper just to write the check than it is to deal with it. Every time we say that, they've taken a little step away. They've taken another chunk away from our freedom. So the corruption, the example of corruption is set at the top. I believe our prime minister is as corrupt an individual as we can possibly have. I don't think there's an ounce of integrity in that man's body. I don't think he knows what integrity is. And that corruption is in our deputy prime minister. Look at our environment minister. There are very few non-corrupted politicians or even bureaucrats. We look at, I forget the chap's name, but I think he ran in Northern Ontario. He was a computer programmer, and he got involved with ArriveCan, and he ended up, I think he was $5 million better off. He was actually a bureaucrat, working as a bureaucrat. He got involved with ArriveCan, and then he was a PPC candidate as well, which put a bit of a black eye, and it gave us a bit of a black eye. But I mean, we are a freedom party. We are about freedom, and we're a young party. So if someone, I think a lot of the times, if someone wants to step in the gap, they're going to say, okay, go ahead. Where I'm more of the opinion that you look at the Parti Québécois. The Parti Québécois will never rule Canada. It will never be there aren't enough seats in Quebec for the Parti Québécois to even form a minority government. And yet they're very solidly supported. And the Quebec voters vote for them for whatever reason, rather than voting for a party that can get into power. I would much sooner run with, and I'm hoping the party brass catches on to this. But I'd much sooner run with 100 high-quality candidates than I would with 340 candidates, of which 2/3 are duds, if you will. I don't know how to put it properly or diplomatically correct, but we experienced that with the last campaign, where a lot of people just they thought they could get in on the hype. They were hoping they'd get elected so that they could get a nice fat paycheck, and when reality hit, they just evaporated. They just disappeared. And that kind of quality we don't need. We need someone that's willing to stand up, stand in the gap, and fight, and do the work and do what's necessary to try and affect a change in our country. And our job right now is to find enough candidates that are able to win their riding, so that we can hold Pierre to his promises. That's our job. And if we can hold Pierre to his promises, Canada can become a freer, better, safer country than what we have right now. So
I was kind of hoping you were going to say Canada can become great again.
well, Canada can become the Canada that we know and love. Whether we want to call it great again, or I think I like to say the Canada that we know and love. And that's not what we're living in right now. We're living in a dystopian reality of some really bad decisions.
All right, Wayne, let's keep this going. You were talking about taxes. I mean, I look at taxation. You have federal income tax, you have property tax, government sales tax, harmonized sales tax, provincial sales tax. They're not calling it this, but you have death tax, you have levies, and you're taxed on top of that. Carbon tax, gas tax, alcohol tax. In a perfect world, I know you're not a tax accountant, tax lawyer, but how would you restructure these taxes to simplify things?
Now, I'm going to talk about a chap that I met who grew up in Soviet Russia, and he worked in Soviet Russia. He emigrated to Canada. After he immigrated to Canada, he became very depressed. He started his own business, and then he became very depressed, and the business disappeared. So I'm not sure what he's doing now. He might have gone back to Russia. I don't know. But one of his biggest complaints is the amount we're taxed. And in Russia, Soviet Russia, they were taxed at a flat rate of 14%. The biggest issue we have with our taxation is that we're not willing to hold our government to account. We're not willing to hold them to, you're bringing in X dollars, you have X minus Y dollars to spend, period. What we're doing is we're the Americans fought a revolution against taxation without representation. And what are we doing? When I was growing up, my parents spent my tax dollars. When I was growing up, I spent your tax dollars. Now you're spending your kids and your grandchildren's tax dollars. I'm not saying you specifically, Payman, but that's what we're doing. We're spending dollars that aren't represented. We're spending our children's inheritance. We need to. I love the example of Milei. I think Javier. I think that's his name.
Javier Milei.
Javier. Yeah. I love his example. We have to determine, as he put it, what's shit and what's not. We have way more parasites in our system than we can afford. And those parasites are non-producing bureaucrats. Now, there are some bureaucracies that we need. There are two bureaucracies, or two professions, if you will, that I say there isn't really a middle ground with them. They're either hyperparasitic or they're hyperproductive. There's nothing in between. And that's teaching and policing. Now, they're both provincial. Well, policing is a federal responsibility as well, but they're provincial responsibility. The teaching is primarily. So I'm not going to go down that too much, other than to say that when students, I've got a friend that is a school board trustee, and they were doing an assessment on grade 3 students and their math skills. And 60% of the grade 3 students could not do the requisite skills to proceed to the next grade level. 60%. Now, as far as I'm concerned, a teacher that is taking a salary and teaching at that standard is hyperparasitic. They're parasites. And not only are they parasitic, but they're taking wages from our system, and they're not producing enough to justify. They're harming the children that are not being taught properly. So that in turn harms our society, and that's where the hyperparasitism comes in, is because it will harm our society. Same with corrupt policing. A cop that does his job is actually quite productive, because we can count on the stability of the society, so the producers can go out and produce and know they can count on a return for their efforts. When we have cops that refuse to charge people with theft, when we have cops that will charge a victim rather than a perpetrator, when we have cops that will and our judicial system as a whole that doesn't recognize self-defense as a means of not escaping, but being given a what's the right term? Not like I'm thinking escaping justice, but it's not escaping justice. It's a right. Being able to defend ourselves is a right. And what they've done is they've convoluted self-defense to the point where you really can't defend yourself in this country properly. The Americans, their attitude is if you break into someone's house, they have every right to take their gun and blow them away. That's in their rights. Our rights don't exist. Property rights don't exist in this country. So we are left in a position where we can't defend ourselves. And I've just gone down another rabbit hole, but that's the two professions that I think can be hyperparasitic, and why. What was the question again?
You know what? I honestly don't remember. I think it was about taxation. Yeah.
Taxation. We need to hold the people that tax, hold our government to account. We need to make them accountable. We're accountable for the dollars we generate that we give to the government. They have to be accountable back, and they have to be willing to hold a budget and stay within their means. So that means that when they generate, like off the time, I don't know, $10 billion in revenue and taxation, that's their budget. It's $10 billion in revenue. That's what they can spend out. Another thing that we need to, like, if I was prime minister tomorrow and I had to do a budget, I would put a memo out to every single portfolio that was accountable to the federal government, and I would tell them that they had to reduce their budget by a minimum of 15% across the board. And then I would watch for the people that chose to download it to their subordinates and to the services, and I would fire them on the spot, because they're the perpetrators. They're the ones that are causing a lot of the grief in our system right now. So I would fire them on the spot, and they would not be allowed to be involved in any federal any federal contract or any federal bureaucracy for at least 15 years, minimum 15 years, and let them find out what it's like to live in the real world. I mean, I think we need to do that. I think we need to start forcing the bureaucrats to be accountable to the people that pay them, which is the taxpayers. I think that it's what we've established is we've established a Ponzi scheme, and what what we're doing right now is, or what happened as a result of Trudeau's mismanagement for 4 years, and then the massive mismanagement over COVID, especially, I'm sure you're on the same side as I am, that the whole damn thing was a facade. It was an excuse to blow a crap load of money and force us into ever higher debt. And Socialism 101 says, get your government into as much debt as possible because it forces higher taxation, and higher taxation forces more poverty. Poor people don't resist the decisions or the policies that come down the pike. So,
Yeah, I don't want to get started on socialism. My blood pressure will shoot up. I'm not as good at controlling my emotions as you are, Wayne.
we are in a socialist country, and we have to accept that, and we have to decide what we want from there. And that's why I'm in this fight, is because I do not want to see my children or grandchildren live under socialism. It's a horrible, horrible system.
For the audience that's watching, I actually we did not anticipate this to be an actual episode, so I didn't prepare questions for Wayne. So I'm going to hit you with another hard one. If you can't answer, don't worry about it. Things that are supposed to be provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government just comes in and throws its weight around. I wanted to get your opinion on it. I'll give you two examples. One, clear as day, healthcare. Like I can't understand why we have Health Canada when it's a provincial jurisdiction. Second, it's my understanding that law enforcement is also provincial. So how does the RCMP fit into this?
Yeah, you hit me with something pretty tough here. First off, what we have is we have a system of. I tend not to be diplomatically correct here. We have devised a system that depends on the government's memory, and that's across the board. Now, you're from BC, so I'm not sure what your financial status is there, but when Doug Ford came into power in Ontario, Kathleen Wynne had run our deficit and our debt to the point where Ontario was and probably still is the most indebted non-sovereign entity on the face of the planet. That's our position in Ontario. So what's happened is, because we cannot balance our own budgets, we've become dependent on federal handouts. Trudeau has learned to govern based on those necessities and handouts. So he hands money out with strings, and the strings are, if you want money for your health care, you have to do this. I think this is one of the biggest reasons why COVID lasted for as long as it did, or the COVID narrative lasted for as long as it did, and the forced vaccines came into play with the provincial governments, because the provinces are so dependent on federal money that the minute Trudeau said, you have to do this, they said, okay. They didn't have a choice. They couldn't modify their budget and plan to survive politically any other way. So with the RCMP, I think it's good for us to have a federal police service. Policing is incredibly expensive. I think we in Ontario we have what we call a sunshine list. They just published the sunshine list last week, and off the top of my head, the education system for our area has about 1,000 people, 1,100 people on the sunshine list. For policing that is supported by our area, we have over 3,000 people on the sunshine list. And the sunshine lists are people that are making over $100,000 a year. So policing is incredibly expensive. For the less populated regions of our country, they still need to be policed. Those areas still need to be policed. And the RCMP will fit those areas better. There are also areas that are more federally under federal jurisdiction. I'm thinking like Aboriginal reserves, the Northern Territories. Now we tend not to have, like we still have the RCMP in those areas, but the more sparsely populated areas tend to have RCMP representation rather than the provincial policing. So again, it's an institution. It's an institution with way more power than it should have, and I'm not sure how we can draw it back, other than, like I said before, 15% across the board, and start seeing some people willing to cut their salaries. Is what we really need to see, and start seeing the salaries being cut back, either voluntarily or not so voluntarily.
I'm very concerned. I'm very worried about all of these things, the effect they're going to have on whatever you want to call it, on industry, on business, on small companies. So, like, taxation is one of those things. Like, when you're taxing a small company, it's at some point it's easier to walk away. Regulations is another one. We kind of talked about this, but if you hire an employee and if you fire that employee, like, there's a rigorous protocol to follow. And a small company that doesn't have an in-house HR or bookkeeper, sometimes you can't follow that. You get in trouble. Bill 63, the Online Harms Act, it's going to destroy small tech companies because they have to have in-house people to communicate with the government full time. What are your thoughts on that? What are your solutions to that?
Well, I'm going to get your blood boiling a bit.
No.
That's the drive with socialism. The drive is towards monopolization, monopolization, and the drive is towards higher accountability towards the government. Okay, so as a small business owner myself, there's a lot of loopholes I can use when I'm accounting to the government my income. Okay, I also have control over my time. The minute I choose to go work for an employer, I lose those loopholes and I lose control over my time. I can, because my costs are fairly low with what I do and my overhead's fairly low, I can choose to opt for lifestyle rather than choose to opt for having to produce. The government doesn't like people that choose for lifestyle over production. So we're creating legislation and the supporting bureaucracies to discourage independence and discourage independent lifestyles. Now, it's unfortunate because we see it translating into opportunities in this country. We should be the wealthiest. We should be the wealthiest country on the planet. Our taxation rate should, we've got a larger infrastructure because of the size of our country, but that's really the limit of where we should have to pay surplus taxation. We should be able to live relatively comfortable. Like our government should be able to function relatively comfortably on probably, I'm thinking in the range of 14% flat tax. across the board. So if I make $100,000, I got to pay $15,000. If I make 200,000, I got to pay 30,000. You know, and a flat tax like that across the board. I really think that that's a reasonable amount of money for government to expect and for us to expect to pay. When we're sitting at 50 and 60%, that disincentivizes our willingness to produce. And that disincentivization translates into a poorer country, less revenues, less monies available, and greater, which is what Trudeau wants, and which is what our socialist environment wants. It wants us to be more highly dependent on the government. But we got to remember the government doesn't have anything. The only thing it has is the ability to tax. And given that it doesn't have anything other than an ability to tax, what it does is it borrows against the tax revenue. And when it gets in so far that it can't pay the interest or the repayment terms on that borrowed money, then it's forced to create another tax. We saw that with the GST. Well, originally we saw it with income tax back in 1917. That was a temporary tax to finance the war effort in Europe. And we're still paying income tax. We go to that was the next really, well, there were different taxes, like sort of hidden taxes. There's a manufacturer's tax, I think it was about 14%. And then there were different importation and duty taxes that we had to deal with over the years, and sort of fluxed around. But the next serious tax was the GST. And that was met with some very serious opposition. The Progressive Conservative Party of Canada was annihilated. There was only one from a supermajority under Brian Mulroney. I think it was in 84, 85. He went, and I think he had the largest majority in Canadian history. Went from that to one sitting MP, Flora MacDonald, in Nova Scotia, I think she was, after the GST went through. So it was a devastating tax. It was devastating for the Progressive Conservative Party, and it was devastating for our country as well. But that came as a result of Trudeau Sr.'s mismanagement. Brian Mulroney, what's politically popular is to borrow money and give resources away. That's what Trudeau Jr. is doing. That's what Trudeau Sr. did. And unfortunately, we do have to pay the piper somewhere along the line. Exactly. Pierre Trudeau came into power in 1968, and he started borrowing money. And he had all kinds of really ingenious things that came down the pike, all costing us a lot of money. Come 1980, actually Ronald Reagan decided that the value of our dollar was falling through, or the American dollar was falling through the floor. And because us Canadians had borrowed a lot of money and we were piggybacking off the Americans, like basically we had money borrowed, and the money we borrowed was against the open market. And because the Americans were driving the interest rates up in order to reduce inflation and bring inflation under control, we were tied at the hip, and so we were faced with increasing interest rates as well. And the interest rates went from, on average, about 10% in the mid to late 70s to, I borrowed money in 1980 at 15%, and by the following spring, 81, I was paying 24.75%. So the interest rates were just absolutely insane, and it put me out of business, is what it did. I just couldn't keep the payments. So, but that was a result of us Canadians borrowing and spending money like mad through the 70s. We saw it as free money, and we spent it. So that's my parents' generation that did that. their parents' generation fought the Second World War and were very, very frugal. We had paid pretty well all our war debts off within 10 years of the Second World War. We were in really good shape. We had some, bits and bobs of debt that we would borrow for infrastructure and that, but we weren't in bad shape up to 1968. And then Trudeau come up with some. There was one thing where we had to do some kind of fitness exercise, and if we pass these tests, we get these special, whether it was a gold or silver or bronze, or I think there was even a platinum. It was all the government, federal government sponsored. There was, we did the Olympics in 78 Olympics, I think it was. It was, I know. My dad had a farm, and at that time, the elm tree population had been devastated by the Dutch elm disease. And so every time he cut a tree down, they give him some kind of, like he got a check. I don't know how much, but he got paid, and it was a federal program that, just to cut these trees down. He cut them down and just let them rot. And I mean, we could have burned them off, but they were more than we could burn off, and they just let them rot away. So terrible waste, and he got paid for it. So we brought in the quota system in the 70s under Trudeau. That's a system that is really, there's a lot of farmers that think it's good, but it enslaves our farmers. It drives the cost of our food outside of what the market should be, and it creates a level of bureaucracy that's really not accountable to anyone.
Sorry, can you describe what is, when you say the quota system, for those of us that don't know what that is, what is that?
Okay, let's go back to the early to mid 60s. What was happening is, so like it's primarily poultry and dairy. So let's focus on dairy because everyone knows dairy, but it's the same thing with eggs and chickens. What would happen is the price of milk would go up. Let's say it increased. So all the farmers would say, oh, okay, price of milk's gone up. I'm going to buy myself a few cows. So they go in debt, they buy these cows, and next thing you know, they're all producing milk. Well, what happens when there's a surplus? Price of milk falls. And so all these farmers are left producing milk, and it's costing them money to milk the cows and ship the money, and they're not making enough to pay for the milk. So they all sell the cows off. Next thing you know, the price of milk goes up. And so the farmers get back, their own worst enemies. They get back into milking cows. They milk the cows, price of milk falls. And it was a roller coaster like this for years and years and years and years. So it was actually quite an ingenious system, but it's gone out of control. So what Eugene Whalen, I think, was the prime driver behind it. He was the agricultural minister back then. And what he said is, well, what we're going to do is, if you want to be a dairy farmer, we're going to give you, not sell, but give you the right to sell your milk. And as long as you meet the criteria of the quota, you can continue to sell your milk, and we'll give you a fair market price, and everything will work out. Well, that worked so well, and that became the buffer. So the theory was, as demand for milk went up, the cost of the quota would go up, or would fall, so that the farmers could get more quota, produce more milk, and then as the demand for milk fell, the cost of the quota would go up. And the idea was to keep the supply relatively stable, and balance it out with a different layer, which theoretically sounds good. But the problem is it's like our housing market. It's gone out of control. Rather than allowing supply and demand, what happened is they started restricting the supply of the quota. And by restricting the supply of the quota, and also our technology got to the point where, when I was, I grew up on a dairy farm, and we were busting to feed and house 36 cows. I mean, it was a full time, like my brother, my dad, my mom, and myself. My sister helped out a lot too. But it was a family affair or a family thing to feed and house these cows. And we've gone from that to it's considered a small farm to feed and house anything under 100 cows. And it's not unusual to have 200-300 cows. In fact, one of my supporters milks, he's one of the largest dairy farmers in Canada, and he milks 1,000 head. So we've created the technology that allow us to milk more cows per farmer. So that technology is translated into high ever increasing value on the quotas. The quota is actually a right to sell the milk or sell the commodity, whether it's chickens or milk or eggs. So, I don't know. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Sorry, I wasn't. That's the dairy cartel that went after Maxime, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Well, there's three quota systems. Well, actually, there's a few that are tied into it too. So, if you like, there's a quota for producing the milk, but then there's a quota for processing the milk. And have you ever heard of Chapman's ice cream? It's pretty big. I don't know if it goes as far as BC or not.
It sounds familiar.
Okay. Chapman's ice cream is just up in Dundalk, or no, Markdale, which is just about 45 minutes north of where I am right now. And they're a huge producer of ice cream. And when they came, Mr. Chapman, I forget his first name, but he came to Canada in 1973, the same year my dad bought his dairy farm. And he bought this little run-down ice cream facility in Markdale. And he just, he bought the ice cream facility because he knew the right to produce ice cream was as scarce as hen's teeth. It was very, very difficult to get that right to produce ice cream. And so he bought that, and then he developed this huge conglomerate of a business as a result of that. And it's huge. But that's, again, the right to produce, or not to produce, but to process. Any milk you purchase in the grocery store, it's had to be processed by a processor that has to buy quota to process that milk. The same with chickens. When you go to buy chickens, whether you go to Swiss Chalet or if you go to the grocery store to buy chickens, those chickens are the only way you can get those chickens is through a farm that has quota. And that farmer has to sell those chickens to a processor that is allowed to process so many chickens. And then, so it's almost like a double quota system, if you will, before you actually get the processed bird. And it'll be the same with eggs too. So eggs are a little bit easier to process. It's most of it's done on the farm, so they're not quite as complicated as chickens or milk.
What a regulatory nightmare this country has become.
I talk to like there's a lot of Mennonites in my community, and I talk to them. I try to talk to them on their term, and my thinking is if you when I'm talking to them, I say if you guys have it's between you and the Dutch that have the most beautiful farms. I'm not sure who has the most beautiful, but the Dutch and the Mennonites have like the most. They're just gorgeous farms, and they're well managed, well looked after. Animals are all well cared for, and I go to them and I say, if you took your farm and you decided to leave it fallow for 50 years, what's that farm going to look like? They said, well, it'd just be a horrible mess. I said, well, that's exactly what we're dealing with our country. I said, if you go into Genesis and after the fall of man, God says, man, you will eat, but only by the sweat of your brow. There will be thorns and thistles, and you will have to deal with them. And That's what we're dealing. It doesn't matter what level we're living at, whether we're working the ground as farmers or agrarians, or we're working in factory, or we're working in the bank or bureaucracy, or we're working at the upper echelons of government. That's a fact of life, is dealing with the weeds, dealing with the thistles and the thorns. It's just, that's the way it is. And so what we've done, and as a population, what we've chosen to do is let the country run without systematically weeding and dealing with and tending the thorns and the thistles. And now we have this horrible mess. And it's going to be a really hard push, even after we've won our seat in Parliament. It's going to be a hard, dedicated, difficult push to try and start to clean up the mess that we're in.
Fantastic interview, but I want to end it on a message of optimism. So what message of hope do you have for Canada?
I'm going to bring out my my religious roots here. I can't quote I should be able to. I quote the scripture enough. I should be able to tell you exactly where it's found in the Bible. But essentially, it goes to the effect that if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves, seek after my face, and pray, I will hear from heaven of I will hear them from heaven and heal their land. We need to humble ourselves, and we need to seek after God and seek after and act on his behalf in faith, and leave it in God's hands, and he will heal our land. We are where we are now because we've chosen to allow I'm just trying to think the right term. I'm thinking parasites, but it's worse than parasites. Predators, I think, is a better term. To allow predators to systematically disqualify our Bible and our faith. And I'm not sure what your faith is, Payman, but as you know, as long as we are willing to allow our faith to be undermined and allow these predators, and it's across the board, whether we want to talk about our education. It starts with the education, but it's in our government. There are when they built the Parliament buildings, they inscribed scripture all throughout the Parliament building. Now, I'm not sure if that scripture is still there or not, but that is that was there because we are a country founded on the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And when we choose to acknowledge the supremacy of God and the rule of law, these problems will start to go away, and they'll evaporate before we even, without a lot of issue. I really believe that. So, as dire as it seems and as hard as it will likely be, as long as we're willing to acknowledge God's supremacy and the rule of law, these things will go away.
Wayne, I'm going to hold you over until after the show, but I wanted to thank you. So Wayne, I've known you for probably a year now, but it occurred to me you and I have never talked, and you're a fascinating individual, and I hope you have success in the upcoming election in your riding, sir.
Well, thank you, Payman. Yes, I appreciate the conversation. I don't know if I'm fascinating or not, but I do think about things a little bit. So, for what it's worth. So, yes. Well, thank you for the interview.
No, thank you for coming on. Goodbye, everybody.